I pretended to be bankrupt during my divorce while hiding millions in my sister's name. The papers felt heavy in my hands as I signed the final transfer documents 3 months before filing for divorce. My sister sat across from me at her kitchen table, her face pale as she realized what I was asking her to do. The numbers on the screen were staggering real estate investments worth $4 million, stock portfolios totaling another $3 million, and cash reserves that would make most people dizzy. Everything that took me 15 years to build was about to disappear on paper, hidden behind my sister's name and social security number. My husband had no idea what was coming, and honestly, neither did I fully understand the magnitude of what I was setting in motion. The whole thing started when I found those messages on his phone 6 months earlier. Late nights at the office suddenly made sense when I saw the photos he was sending to his coworker. 22 years of marriage, 2 kids in college, and he was throwing it all away for someone barely older than our daughter. The betrayal cut deep, but what made it worse was overhearing his phone call with his brother about how he planned to take me for everything I was worth in the divorce. He laughed about how I was just a housewife who got lucky with some investments, completely dismissing the fact that I had turned my inheritance into a fortune through careful planning and smart decisions. My lawyer's office smelled like leather and disappointment when I first walked in to discuss my options. She explained how community property laws would work against me, how my husband could claim half of everything I had built. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who mocked my financial skills behind my back was planning to benefit from them in the divorce. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. I needed to move fast, and I needed someone I could trust completely. My sister had always been there for me, but asking her to become a paper millionaire overnight was beyond anything I had ever requested. The asset transfers took weeks to complete, and every day felt like walking on thin ice. Bank statements, property deeds, investment accounts, everything slowly moved from my name to hers. We set up a small office in her basement where she could handle phone calls about the properties, and I coached her on what to say if anyone asked questions. The hardest part was watching her stress levels spike, as she realized she was now responsible for managing millions of dollars in assets that weren't really hers. Sleep became elusive for both of us as we coordinated the complex web of paperwork needed to make everything appear legitimate. My husband's behavior became increasingly suspicious as I prepared to file the divorce papers. He started asking casual questions about our finances, trying to gauge how much money we had saved and what our investments were worth. Little did he know that on paper, I was about to become nearly penniless. The checking account showed just enough to cover basic expenses, and I had closed all the high-yield savings accounts weeks earlier. When I finally served him with divorce papers, his confident smirk told me everything I needed to know about his expectations. The look on his face during our first mediation session was priceless when my lawyer presented my financial disclosure forms. According to the documents, I had less than $50,000 to my name and no significant assets beyond our shared home. His lawyer kept asking for additional documentation, clearly suspicious that someone who had been making smart investments for decades could suddenly have so little wealth. My husband's anger was palpable as he realized his golden parachute had turned into a lead balloon, but there was nothing he could prove without conducting a full forensic audit. His desperation became apparent when he hired a private investigator to dig into my finances. The investigator spent 3 weeks following me around, photographing my daily activities and trying to find evidence of hidden assets. I made sure to shop at discount stores, drive my older car instead of the luxury vehicle I usually preferred, and generally present the image of someone struggling financially. Meanwhile, my sister was dealing with property managers and investment advisors, learning to navigate a world she had never imagined being part of. The stress was taking its toll on both of us, but we were too deep into the deception to turn back now. The private investigator's report came back clean because technically, I wasn't lying about my financial situation. Every asset was properly transferred and legally owned by my sister, who had become quite skilled at managing the portfolio I had spent years building. The investigator found no evidence of hidden bank accounts or secret investments in my name because there weren't any. My husband's lawyer tried to challenge the timeline of the asset transfers, but everything had been done months before I filed for divorce, making it difficult to prove fraudulent intent. My mother called me one evening in tears, explaining that my father had been asking strange questions about family finances and whether I had given my sister any money recently. Apparently, my husband had reached out to my parents, fishing for information about potential family loans or gifts that might explain my apparent poverty. This was a complication I hadn't anticipated. My parents had no idea about the elaborate scheme I had orchestrated with my sister. The thought of involving them in the deception made my stomach turn, but I also couldn't risk them accidentally revealing something that would expose the truth. I had to make an emergency trip to my parents' house to explain the situation without actually telling them what I was doing. The conversation was awkward as I tried to convince them that my husband was paranoid and that they should avoid discussing family finances with him. My father, who had always been suspicious of my husband's motives, seemed to understand that something serious was happening, but he didn't press for details. My mother, however, was more concerned about the impact on our family relationships and kept asking why my husband would be so interested in my sister's finances. The strain on my relationship with my sister was becoming more apparent as the months passed. She had started making independent decisions about the investments without consulting me, which both impressed and terrified me. Her natural business instincts were better than I had expected, and she was actually improving the performance of some of the properties through better management. However, this also meant that she was becoming emotionally invested in assets that technically belonged to me, and I worried about what would happen when it came time to transfer everything back. Things took an unexpected turn when my sister met someone at a real estate investment seminar she attended to better understand the properties she was managing. He was a financial advisor who specialized in estate planning, and their professional relationship quickly turned personal. Suddenly, my sister had access to legitimate expertise about managing the wealth she was holding in trust for me. This new relationship also provided additional cover for her sudden interest in high-end investments and property management. Her boyfriend assumed she had inherited money from a distant relative, and she played along with his assumptions. My husband's increasingly erratic behavior during the divorce proceedings raised red flags with his own lawyer. He became obsessed with proving that I was hiding assets, spending thousands of dollars on forensic accountants and additional investigators. His paranoia was destroying his relationship with his girlfriend, who hadn't signed up for the drama of a contentious divorce case. The irony was delicious. His affair partner was experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be with someone who was financially and emotionally unstable. The second investigator my husband hired was more thorough than the first one. She started looking into my sister's financial history, trying to find connections between us that might explain her sudden wealth. This woman was relentless, interviewing neighbors and checking public records going back years. I realized that my sister's story about inheriting money from a distant relative wouldn't hold up under serious scrutiny. We needed a more sophisticated cover story, and we needed it fast. My sister and I spent an entire weekend creating a fake paper trail that would support her inheritance story. We forged documents that showed she had received a substantial inheritance from our great-aunt, a woman who had actually died years earlier, but whose estate had been settled quietly. The process of creating believable documentation was exhausting and nerve-wracking, but it was necessary to protect both of us from the investigation. My sister's acting skills were put to the test, as she had to convince people that she had simply been modest about her inheritance. The forensic accountant my husband hired was getting uncomfortably close to the truth. She had discovered that several of the property transfers had occurred within a short time frame, which looked suspicious even though it was technically legal. Her report noted that my sister's spending patterns had changed dramatically after acquiring the properties, which was exactly the kind of detail that could unravel our entire scheme. I realized that we needed to create some distance between my sister and me to make the story more believable. For 3 months, my sister and I barely spoke to each other in public. We avoided family gatherings where we might be seen together, and we made sure that our social media accounts didn't show any recent interactions. This forced separation was emotionally difficult, especially since we had always been close. But it was necessary to maintain the illusion that we had separate financial lives. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect my assets, I was sacrificing the most important relationship in my life. My husband's paranoia reached new heights when he started following my sister around, trying to catch her in some kind of inconsistency. He would sit in his car outside her house, taking photos of visitors and delivery trucks, looking for any evidence that she was managing more wealth than she claimed. His behavior was becoming increasingly unstable, and I worried that he might do something that would put both of us in danger. The affair that had started all of this was completely over, as his girlfriend had finally had enough of his obsessive behavior. The final settlement negotiations were scheduled for a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after I had first discovered his affair. My husband walked into the conference room expecting to walk away with half of what he thought was a modest estate, but his lawyer had prepared him for the possibility of getting even less than that. The mediator reviewed the financial disclosures one final time, and my husband's face went through a range of emotions as he realized how little he would actually receive. His half of our limited assets would barely cover his legal fees and the cost of all those investigations. As we signed the final divorce decree, my husband looked across the table at me with a mixture of confusion and defeat. He had gambled everything on a relationship with a much younger woman and a divorce settlement that would set him up for life, but both bets had failed spectacularly. His girlfriend had left him months earlier when the stress of the divorce became too much, and now he was walking away with barely enough money to rent a decent apartment. The man who had planned to take me for everything I was worth was leaving, with less than what he had contributed to our marriage. The aftermath of the divorce was surprisingly peaceful, but managing the secret arrangement with my sister became increasingly complex. She had grown comfortable with her role as a wealthy property owner and was making decisions about the investments without consulting me first. Her relationship with the financial advisor had become serious, and she was talking about marriage plans that would further complicate our arrangement. I realized that what had started as a temporary deception was becoming a permanent restructuring of my financial life. My sister's relationship with her financial advisor boyfriend was progressing faster than I had anticipated. He was talking about moving in together and combining their financial resources, which would mean he would have access to detailed information about assets that technically belonged to me. The thought of a stranger having control over my life's work was terrifying, but I also couldn't ask my sister to sacrifice her happiness for my financial security. The web of lies was becoming too complex to maintain, and I could see that everyone involved was starting to suffer from the strain. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my sister announced her engagement to the financial advisor she had met during this whole ordeal. She wanted to come clean with her fiancé about the true ownership of the assets she had been managing, but I panicked at the thought of involving another person in our secret. We had heated arguments about the risks of exposure and what would happen if my ex-husband found out about the deception. The stress of maintaining the lie was starting to affect our relationship, and I worried about losing both my sister and my fortune. The breaking point came when my sister's fiancé started asking detailed questions about her investment strategy and wanted to help her optimize her portfolio. He was impressed by her apparent financial acumen and wanted to propose some changes that would require her to make decisions I wasn't comfortable with. The web of lies was becoming too complex to maintain, and I could see that my sister was struggling with the deception as well. She had fallen in love with someone while pretending to be someone she wasn't, and the guilt was eating away at her. My ex-husband's financial situation had deteriorated significantly since our divorce, and he was starting to ask mutual friends questions about how I was managing to maintain my lifestyle on such limited resources. He had noticed that I was still living in the same house and hadn't made any dramatic changes to my spending habits. His suspicions were growing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he started investigating again. The statute of limitations on challenging the divorce settlement hadn't expired, and I was vulnerable if he could prove fraud. The situation became even more complicated when my daughter came home from college for the holidays, and started asking questions about family finances. She had noticed that her aunt seemed to be doing very well financially and wondered if there was something she should know about family money. My daughter was studying finance herself and was smart enough to notice inconsistencies in the stories she was hearing. I realized that the deception was affecting not just my relationship with my sister, but potentially my relationship with my children as well. My son, who was finishing his senior year of college, had different concerns about the family's financial situation. He was worried about student loans and whether he would be able to afford graduate school, given what he understood about our limited resources after the divorce. The guilt of watching him stress about money, while I had millions hidden away, was overwhelming. I wanted to help him, but any financial assistance would raise questions about where the money was coming from. The pressure was mounting from all sides when my sister's fiancé started conducting his own background research on her supposed inheritance. He was too good at his job to miss the obvious signs that something wasn't right with her financial history. The documents we had created to support her story wouldn't hold up under professional scrutiny, and I could see that my sister was starting to crack under the pressure of maintaining the lie. She was having trouble sleeping and had started avoiding social situations where she might have to discuss her wealth. My ex-husband's paranoia hadn't ended with the divorce settlement. He had started following both me and my sister again, convinced that there was something he had missed during the original investigation. His behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and I worried that he might do something dangerous if he discovered the truth. The man who had betrayed me was now stalking my family, and I felt responsible for putting everyone in danger with my elaborate scheme. The final twist came when my sister's fiancé ran a routine background check on the properties she claimed to own and discovered irregularities in the transfer dates that didn't match her story about inheritance. He was too good at his job to miss the obvious signs that something wasn't right with her financial history. My sister came to me in tears, explaining that she had to choose between telling him the truth or losing the man she loved. The decision she made would determine not just her future, but mine as well. The confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening when my sister's fiancé showed up at my door with a folder full of documents. He had pieced together the entire scheme, from the timing of the asset transfers to the fake inheritance story we had created. His expression was a mixture of disappointment and professional concern, as he explained that he could lose his license if he knowingly participated in financial fraud. The man my sister loved was about to become the person who could destroy everything I had worked to protect. My sister arrived at my house 20 minutes later, and the three of us sat in my living room having the most difficult conversation of my life. Her fiancé was surprisingly understanding about the emotional motivations behind the deception, but he was also clear that he couldn't marry someone who was technically committing fraud. The choice was stark. Either we unwind the entire scheme and risk my ex-husband discovering the truth, or my sister would lose the man she loved and possibly face legal consequences for her role in the deception. The process of transferring all the assets back to my name took 6 weeks and required the help of multiple attorneys who specialized in complex financial transactions. Every day felt like a countdown to disaster as we worked to make the transfers look legitimate and backdate some of the documentation to cover our tracks. My sister's fiancé helped us navigate the legal complexities, but the stress was taking a toll on everyone involved. The relationship between my sister and her fiancé became strained as they dealt with the reality of what she had done for me. My ex-husband's surveillance of our family had intensified during this period, and he somehow sensed that something significant was happening. He started making phone calls to mutual friends and family members, asking if anyone had noticed changes in my behavior or lifestyle. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as we were trying to quietly unwind the asset transfers, he was becoming more suspicious than ever. I realized that even if we successfully transferred everything back, he might still be able to prove that fraud had occurred. The legal implications of what we had done were more serious than I had initially realized. My sister's fiancé explained that financial fraud in a divorce case could result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties. The thought of going to prison for trying to protect my assets was terrifying, But the alternative of my ex-husband benefiting from my hard work was equally unacceptable. We were caught in a situation where every option carried significant risks, and the stress was affecting everyone's health and relationships. My children became inadvertently involved when my son's girlfriend, who was studying law, overheard a conversation about asset transfers and started asking questions. She was smart enough to understand the legal implications of what she was hearing, and I could see the concern in her eyes as she realized what her boyfriend's mother had been doing. The web of deception was expanding to include people who had never asked to be part of it, and I felt the weight of responsibility for putting everyone at risk. The final revelation came when my sister's fiancé discovered that my ex-husband had hired a new investigator who was specifically looking into the timing of asset transfers between family members. This investigator was more sophisticated than the previous ones and had access to resources that could uncover the truth about our scheme. The race was on to complete the asset transfers before the investigation could prove what we had done, but time was running out. Standing in my sister's living room, watching her pack boxes while her fiancé waited in the car outside, I realized that my elaborate plan to protect my assets had cost me something far more valuable. The millions I had hidden were safe, but the relationship with my sister might never recover from the strain of the deception. She had chosen love over our secret, and I couldn't blame her for wanting to start her marriage with honesty. As she handed me the keys to properties and account information for investments that were about to become mine again, I wondered if the victory over my ex-husband had been worth the price I was paying. The aftermath of the asset transfers left me technically wealthy again, but emotionally bankrupt. My sister's relationship with her fiancé survived, but barely, and they decided to postpone their wedding until they could rebuild trust. My children learned about the deception through family gossip and were disappointed that I had kept such a significant secret from them. The family dynamics that had sustained me through the divorce were fundamentally changed by the lies I had told to protect my financial security. My ex-husband never discovered the full extent of what I had done, but his continued surveillance and paranoia made it clear that he suspected something. The final irony was that his obsession with proving I had hidden assets consumed what little money he had received from the divorce settlement. He spent his portion of our shared assets on investigations that never quite uncovered the truth, leaving him in a worse financial position than if he had simply accepted the settlement and moved on with his life. The psychological toll of maintaining such an elaborate deception for over a year had lasting effects on everyone involved. My sister required months of counseling to deal with the anxiety and guilt she felt about her role in the scheme. Her fiancé struggled with trust issues that extended beyond their relationship into his professional life. My children questioned everything they thought they knew about their mother's character and integrity. The price of protecting my financial assets had been the emotional security of my entire family. Looking back, I realized that the scheme succeeded in its immediate goal of preventing my ex-husband from benefiting from my hard work and investments. However, the long-term consequences were far more complex and damaging than I had anticipated. The relationships that had been most important to me were forever changed by the deception, and the trust that had taken decades to build was destroyed in a matter of months. The millions I had protected were still mine, but they felt tainted by the sacrifices I had made to keep them. The legal ramifications continued to unfold months after the asset transfers were complete. My sister's fiancé had reported the potential fraud to his professional licensing board, which meant that there was now an official record of the suspicious activity. While no criminal charges were filed, the investigation created a permanent cloud over my financial dealings and made it difficult to conduct normal business transactions. The very wealth I had tried to protect became harder to manage and invest due to the scrutiny from regulatory authorities. My ex-husband's life took a dramatic turn for the worse as his obsession with proving my deception consumed his remaining resources and mental health. He lost his job due to his erratic behavior and inability to focus on anything other than his investigation of my finances. The affair that had started the entire chain of events was long over, but he seemed incapable of moving on from his conviction that I had somehow cheated him out of millions. His paranoia alienated him from friends and family, leaving him isolated and increasingly unstable. The final chapter of this story is still being written, as I try to rebuild the relationships that were damaged by my deception. My sister and I are slowly working toward forgiveness, but the easy trust we once shared is gone forever. Her marriage to the financial advisor eventually took place, but the ceremony was overshadowed by the unresolved tension about what had happened. My children have maintained their relationships with me, but there's a wariness in their interactions that never existed before they learned about the asset hiding scheme. The money I fought so hard to protect sits in accounts that feel more like a burden than a blessing. Every investment decision is complicated by the knowledge that my wealth was preserved through deception and betrayal of the people I loved most. The financial security I thought I was fighting for has become a source of guilt and isolation rather than peace of mind. I succeeded in keeping my assets away from my ex-husband, but I lost something far more valuable in the process: the trust and respect of my family.